The speaker today here with us is Suzanne Frasier. She is an architect. She has studied at the City College of New York, from where she has done a post-graduation as well. She has been associated with the New York School of Interior Design since 1998 and is an associate professor at the Morgan State School of Architecture. She was a Fulbright Fellow from the year 2012 and 13 and has co-authored an exhibition on the Teen Murti Bhavan in Delhi. Today, her topic is the trajectory of the North American construction industry since the 20th century. And I would like Suzanne to take and begin her talk. Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I want to thank Seton University for inviting me. It's thrilling to be here, and thank you. And I'll be back next year, so I have to work on another lecture before I return. This is a lecture that I've essentially been giving for nearly 12 years now to my American undergraduate design students. It's become a bit notorious, and I've traveled around the United States a bit, delivering it in other schools in other countries. I'm going to just come around because I feel very political for some reason when I'm in front of a podium. I'm not used to it. Can you all hear me all right? Is this working? Oh, then I feel like a rock star. I'll stick with this for now. Keep me standing still. The construction industry in the United States is 1/3 of the American economy. It's a huge economic generator, and buildings are what produce almost all the greenhouse gases in the United States. So it's not cars, it's not the airplanes, it's how we heat and cool and light our buildings. It's what's generating all the greenhouse gases that are causing the global climate change in our country. So architects have been very aware of this for years, and they were actually some of the first people that were ringing the alarms about the pending dangers. But it's like in the United States, it's like trying to turn a tanker in the sea. You can't make a hard right or a hard left. You turn the steering wheel full and the tanker keeps going straight. And that's kind of the trajectory, that is the trajectory that the United States is stuck on right now. So this lecture is a lecture that I give to my students so that they understand what the events and what the innovations that happened since the Industrial Revolution that got us building the way we build in North America now. That it wasn't something that happened haphazardly. However, it was something that maybe buffeted is a better word, and as I move through the presentation, we'll understand why. And I start with plumbing systems for buildings, and I thought, as I was reviewing this show last night to rehearse it for the presentation, I thought, what a joke that I have a Britisher up on my first slide. Who knows, anybody know who this is? Anybody recognize this guy besides Arthur? Anybody else recognize who this is? You know who it is? No, wrong. You get a homework assignment. No, this is Dr. John Snow. And he was a medical doctor. He was an anesthesiologist in London in the middle of the 19th century. So I'm going to tell you a quick story that happened in the year 1854. So this is about 6 years before the Civil War broke out in the United States of America. It's 3 years before the mutiny happened here in India. So you're all with me now? You know where we are chronologically, right? So it's the summer of 1854 in the city of London, in the Soho neighborhood, and an infant dies of cholera. An infant dies of cholera, a baby dies of cholera. This is in the tenement slums, the Dickensian London, in the Soho neighborhood. And everybody flees for their lives. They're terrified of the cholera, and they think that the cholera is in the air, and that's why they run, because they think when disease is airborne is miasma, that you can catch the cholera by breathing it in. And they're terrified. And you all know what cholera is, right? It's a horrible death. It's a horrible, painful death. So this doctor, he had a theory that the cholera was not in the air, the cholera was in the water. And he went to this neighborhood. Now you have to understand, people are fleeing for their lives, and he goes to this neighborhood where the cholera is, and he finds the local pastor, the preacher from the local church in the parish. And he says, I want you to come with me. We're going to go door to door, and I need to meet everybody in this neighborhood. So Dr. John Snow and the preacher go door to door in these slum tenements in London. They knock on the door and they ask everybody, how many people have cholera? Who's dying? Where do you get your water? And he produced a map. And this is not the map he made, this is a copy of a map. The map he made doesn't exist anymore. This is a copy of it that was produced shortly after this crisis happened. And what he did was that he proved that, he said, the cholera is in the water and it's coming from this pump. And he used the map to show it. So you see the map. There's a lot of marks here. So every one of these little black slashes is a death. And he mapped them. And what he proved is that it gets very dense in the middle there, and there was a pump there on Broad Street. It's called the Broad Street Pump. And he had the authorities put a lock on this pump because none of these houses had plumbing. They would go down the street, way down the street, and put the water in the bucket, and then take it back upstairs to use in their domestic. So he put a lock on that pump, and then the cholera outbreak stopped. Now, epidemiologists say, well, the epidemic was petering out anyway, and there's all these contemporary arguments about that. But here's the other thing about Dr. John Snow. He was Queen Victoria's doctor. Yes, that Victoria. Big, no one's laughing. In America, people would laugh at that. So he actually delivered her last child. He was the obstetrician for her last baby. So he's a very influential man in Victorian England, and he went to Parliament with this map and said, listen, cholera is in the water, where we have these industrial factories happening, people are moving to the city, you got to do something about this or we're going to have a health crisis and you're not going to have any employees to run your mills. And so they did. They built the London sewer system at the end of the 19th century, which is arguably the greatest engineering feat of the 19th century. This map is the initial sewer system for the city of Philadelphia in America, which happened just a few years later. The world was industrializing, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and very quickly we are having municipal sewer systems, industrialized sewer systems for cities, bringing potable water into metropolitans and taking the sewage out. Now, many ancient cultures had sewer systems. It wasn't something that was invented in England by white people in the West, but this is the first industrialized sewer system, and this is an important thing for people learning how to build buildings to start understanding. In America, we don't think too much about getting clean water and getting rid of our waste, because we don't have to think about it. It's a flip of a switch, it's a touch of a button. We have clean water 24/7, 365. We don't even think about it. It's not very expensive either. This is just a quick riser diagram. Another important innovation that happened at this time, maybe 10 years later, is that the first elevator with a safety system built into it was invented by a man named Otis. There were elevators before this, but if they failed, they would smash. Right? Otis invented the safety system so that when the elevator failed, as you went slamming down to the bottom of the pit, there was a safety system so you'd bounce instead of shattering and splattering at the bottom of the elevator pit. And this was a momentous innovation in America, as you know, because we started building skyscrapers. Prior to this era, people lived in handmade buildings in America, and they didn't get higher than 5 stories because no one would go up 6 stories, right? Just too much to walk, too much to lug anything. So this is an era of extreme change in technology. Oh, this is the first safety elevator ever in the world. It was installed in Soho in New York, not Soho in London, another older Soho. And now it's in a museum in upstate New York. If you come and visit me in America, I'll take you, we'll go look at it. In America, I always ask my students, do you recognize this building? Andy, do you recognize the building? This is the first commercial power plant in the world. And it was designed, yes, Pearl Street Power Plant, Thomas Alva Edison, the guy who invented the light, who says he invented the light bulb. This was the power plant that he made. He designed it, he invented it, and he built it, and he actually powered a lot of the buildings all the way down the tip of the island of Manhattan. This happened in 1889, so I'm still at the end of the 19th century. And this, you have to understand, this is a very, very exciting time in the United States of America, because this is actually when America would be something that we recognized as contemporary people. Because prior to the Civil War in the United States, the US was really, it was sort of a small England, or a bigger England. It was still very British. And this self-identifying as being American, as being from the States, didn't happen until we had a Civil War, until we fought the Civil War and got through it. So here's Thomas Alva Edison's power plant, 1889. Very quickly, the United States began electrifying. So this is a photograph from the city that I live in, Baltimore, Maryland, from 1904. Mahenjo, you'll recognize the shop tower. And you can see that the city is already beginning to electrify. It happened very rapidly in the United States. So now we're eliminating wood-burning stoves, we're bringing electrical power, electrical lighting into cities. And the American authorities very quickly realized that whoever had power would have the power. So they quickly formed utilities, which are quasi-public, quasi-private entities that control the power. So in the United States of America, it's illegal for a private citizen to sell electricity to someone else. And that's going to be important later on in this lecture. So hang on to that thought. I'm going to jump forward a couple of decades just because of time. The beginning of the 20th century in America was a time of great social change in our country. We were unionizing, there were a lot of convulsions between the socialists and Republicans. There was a lot of innovation. We were getting cars, but there was also a lot of stifling. There was the women's suffragette movement, women trying to get the right to vote. There was prohibition in our country, which was very complicated situation, something fascinating for you to read. It was really a lot based on racism, actually, the whole prohibition movement, but that's way beyond. We can talk about it after. It's interesting to bring that up in a dry state. Anyway, we can talk about that after dinner over some tally. So, World War I, here's an image of the troops. These actually look like British troops in the trenches. America's participation or non-participation in World War I is a very complicated issue because we were still very wrapped up in a lot of domestic problems at home. So we were not even the big international power at this point that you know of America right now. And then we had a lot of tragedies that convulsed our country. The first one was the Dust Bowl. How many of you have heard of the Dust Bowl? Couple of you, okay. Dust Bowl was an environmental disaster that happened in the United States. The center part of our country is where our agricultural belt is. And because of overutilizing agricultural fields and improper agricultural practices, we depleted the topsoil. And then we had a couple of calamitous weather events where we had a couple of years of drought in a row. And the center of the country turned into a dust bowl. And it was so bad that the dust storms actually blocked the sunlight across the entire Western Hemisphere. It was a severe storm, and we had mass migration. And we had a lot of starvation and hunger in our country. And the interesting thing about this is the part of my lecture where my students really start listening, because this event profoundly affected a lot of families in the United States, and it's recent enough that they remember it, like, oh, well, that's when my family shifted to California, or that's when my family shifted to Chicago, because people lost their farms. And simultaneously, the stock market crashed, and we had the Great Depression. And my parents grew up in the Great Depression, so we still have a generation alive in the United States that remembers all of this. So why does this matter to the construction industry? Hang in there, stay with me. I'm taking you there. And the only thing that got us out of the Dust Bowl and the Depression was World War II. And what World War II did for America, first of all, we had a clearly definable bad guy, and that was like a stroke of luck for us. And we had a president who was very assertive, and he started taking the factories that had been built in the United States for private industry and using them for the war effort. So factories that were making cars began to make airplanes and tanks and guns and munitions, boats. So our country completely industrialized, and we had the assembly lines so that we had mass production. So up until this point, America is still looking very much like a handmade country. And then the GIs came back. And these are people who grew up during the Depression, right? They were young soldiers, and then they had to go to war, and then they came back. And we had to house them. And so we mass-produced houses. And this is the first time in the United States where you see a community of houses that was essentially produced in a factory, so that this photograph could be exchanged with a line of cars, or a line of airplanes, or a line of shoes. Every single one looked the same. These houses also still exist. These are, how many of you students know what these are? Have you seen these in the history books? These are Levitt homes, and they're in Long Island, and they're also in Prince George's County in Maryland. So if you come and visit me, I can take you and we can go look at these. These are the first mass-produced residential units in the world. And who bought these houses? The GIs returning from World War II moved into these homes. So this was a profound, and this issued the whole era, the beautiful American cars from the 1950s. Look at this thing. It's actually probably from the late 40s. That didn't last too long. So, into World War II, we go through the 1950s, era of massive prosperity in the USA, same with the 60s, but the 60s we start having a lot of, again, now you're starting to see already in one lecture, a complete loop, because now we're going into another era of social convulsions. We have the civil rights movement, women's rights movement, very difficult time in the USA. And then I'm going to bring you up to the early 1970s, to another time when that really rocked the construction industry in the USA. This is an image from a war that was taking place in Israel in October of 1973. Egypt launched a missile that landed in the country of Israel, and the two countries began a war. And the United States sided with Israel, because Israel was a historic ally of our country. And in retaliation, there was OPEC put an oil boycott on our country. So OPEC is the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries. And so we were in the United States, and we couldn't get any crude oil. And we didn't have any oil fields, hardly any, and we had something like only 8 oil refineries in the entire United States of America. And so it essentially shut our country down. We didn't have enough fuel to heat our schools, to run our buildings. Gasoline was rationed, and I remember this because I was a teeny bopper, and so it was funny. Because in Delhi, they're having the alternate days for being able to drive your car. In this year, depending on your license plate, you could I can remember, you could go get gasoline on the second Tuesday or the fourth Tuesday of the month, and you have to park your car and be in line for 6 hours, and then they would allow you to buy 2 gallons of gasoline. And that's it. It was very, very difficult. And it was, of course, it was the summer, and I remember this because I had a 2-year-old baby brother, and we had a Chevy 2 that had crank windows and no air conditioning, and we had to sit there in the car with my mother and my brother screaming. It was just a horrible, traumatic experience. And it must have been terrible for my parents. So my students, actually in America, they can't even conceive of this as I tell them the story. So I say, you think your gasoline just runs like water, but it doesn't. Our president during this era was Jimmy Carter. You guys know, you've heard of Jimmy Carter? Some people are saying, yeah, okay, good. So Jimmy Carter told Americans, turn down your thermostat, save energy, put on a sweater, turn off the lights when you leave the room. Americans never did that. They would crank up the furnace full blast and walk around in their underwear in the middle of winter. It's true. But come visit us anyway. We won't scare you like that. So Jimmy Carter said, you have to be more prudent. You have to save energy. And here he is. That's Jimmy. He's on the roof of the White House in Washington, D.C. He installed solar panels on top of the roof house. And because we had no crude oil, because no one would sell it to us, he channeled a lot of federal money into alternative energies and alternative building methods. So there was a lot of development in solar houses. This is, earlier I showed you the Levitt homes, the factory-produced homes. These are solar homes in Saskatchewan, Canada. This is the first suburban community built entirely of suburban homes, and it still exists. And here they are when they're being constructed. Another technology that was developed in the late 70s was building wrap. This is like a blanket that you put around the building to hold the heat in so that you can turn the furnace down, not use so much heating oil or natural gas to heat your houses. This led to a big problem because if you put a blanket around the house, when people start occupying it, it will warm up on the inside. And what happens is convection, the heat will rise up. So what happened in these houses is that we had something called infiltration. So in the infrared photograph, you can see where it's warm and the blue is cold. So through the convection heating up the inside, it was sucking in cold air under the door thresholds and in through the basement windows. So you'd be inside these buildings in the 80s, and I remember this, and you'd hear in the 70s, you hear, and there'd be all the cold air getting sucked into your house. So we started weather stripping everything, putting stripping around all the openings to stop the infiltration. And that led to mold, black mold. And this causes respiratory disease, and we have a lot of problems of this in the United States. And in point of fact, in a hotel in Philadelphia, it was in the early 80s, these guys are called Legionnaires. It's a long story, but they're a happy bunch of guys, and they're all over America. They're like a club. So these guys were having a convention in a hotel in Philadelphia, which was built with building wrap. They retrofitted it with building wrap and weather stripping in the hotel, no operable windows. Well, a bacteria got into the HVAC system, and these guys in the photograph, half of them died that week. They got Legionnaire's disease, and then they died. They were hospitalized, and everybody panicked. We thought there was some kind of plague coming to the United States. But they found that they did an investigation, and they found the bacteria in the HVAC system. So these rapid changes were convulsing the construction industry because we were trying to catch up with all these world events that were making us change the way we were building. So this is all happening in the span of about 8 years. I'm now at 1979, where there is a revolution in Iran. The Shah of Iran gets overthrown by a fundamentalist leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Shah gets ousted. Well, we were really tight with the Shah, and we were buying a lot of oil from Iran at that time. Simultaneously, this is when my students really start freaking out because they're starting to recognize all these names. Simultaneously, Iran's next door neighbor, Iraq, Saddam Hussein says, oh, the Shah's out, Iran's in pandemonium, I'm going to invade. So the Iran-Iraq war starts. We had been also getting a lot of oil from Iraq. Iraq stopped selling oil because they were using all their oil for their own war effort with Iran. So Americans hear all this, and it's only about 6 or 7 years after our first crises with OPEC when we had the oil embargo. And so what do Americans do? Yes. Whoever said that, good, they panicked. And here you see them standing in line. They started hoarding fuel. Companies started hoarding fuel. Regular citizens started hoarding fuel. At a very dramatic time, because they thought, here we go again, we're not going to be able to get gasoline. But a lot of things were happening in this era. So this was right around the time when we were coming up for the next presidential election. And I'm going to skip forward a little bit. And so Jimmy Carter lost the election, mostly because he told us all to wear sweaters and turn the lights off and the thermostat down. You know, things that people don't want to hear. And in the Iranian Revolution, they took a lot of Americans hostage. And Jimmy Carter took the heat for this. So the reason why this is important for the construction industry is that we lost a president. He lost the election. We lost the president who was willing to spend federal dollars on innovative construction technology. And then the next person we got was him, and he was friends with her. Who knows what the very first presidential thing that Ronald Reagan did when he entered the office? Who knows?
Did he try to buy the hostages up?
Well, no, the hostages got released a few days or a few weeks later, and he took all the credit for it, but it was actually because of Jimmy Carter's ambassadors and negotiators working on the deal, but he just couldn't get it done before the election. The very first thing that Ronald Reagan did as President of the United States was sign the work order to have the solar panels removed from the roof of the White House. It's true. That's the first thing he did as president. And then simultaneously, we started striking oil in the United States, because all throughout the 1970s, we were looking for oil on our own land, and we found it. And not only us, the Russians, the Nigerians, the Mexicans, and the Venezuelans. Everybody starts finding oil. Everybody's finding. So what happens? The bottom drops out of the oil market, and Professor Frasier gets her driver's license because she's 17, and the price of gas is. Yeah, 74 cents a gallon. I loved it. It was fun. 74 cents a gallon. So, crazy times. The 80s were a wild decade. I was in architecture school. Exciting time. Very quietly, the United Nations is watching all of this happen. And they're saying, this is not good. We don't like any of these patterns. And the United Nations at this time, in the mid-1980s, formed a committee to look at all these huge repercussions, these shocks that are going through the world, these wars, these oil embargoes, these environmental issues. And they produced a report called the Brundtland Report, named after a woman who led this committee. And it was written in this report, which was all about sustainability for development on our globe, global sustainability. And they made a definition of sustainability. It was coined in the mid-1980s. Did you guys know that? That this term that we use so casually now is actually specifically defined and put forth by the United Nations, by the Brundtland Commission. That's B-R-U-N-D-T-L-A-N-D. It's a Nordic name, Brundtland. So, verbatim from this report, the definition of sustainability It's meeting our current needs without jeopardizing future generations' ability to meet their own needs. Have you heard that? So yeah, a lot of you are saying it. That's from a report from the mid-1980s from the United Nations. Meeting our current needs without jeopardizing future generations' ability to meet their own needs. That's where that comes from. In the 1980s, American popular conscience is shifting. It's an exciting decade. It's a lot of social turmoil and a lot of tragedy. We had the AIDS epidemic break out in the 1980s. So there was a lot of social consciousness. And in the academy, we have critical theory developing, feminist theory developing. So popular culture is really making a big shift. And then we had this catastrophe happen. This is a photograph of the Exxon Valdez, which was a horrific oil spill. It happened in 1989. And this was oil, crude oil, that had been pumped from the Alaskan territories, and then they shipped it down the shipping lanes along the west coast of the United States, so past Alaska, past Washington and Oregon, down into California where the oil refineries were. Well, the captain of this ship had been drinking and he went to bed early, and he left the ship in charge of his third mate. Not the first mate, yeah. That's right, yeah, third. Not the first, not the second, the third mate. It's kind of like giving the keys to your Innova to your 2-year-old. It's not a good idea. And he ran it into a reef, and it spilled. This was some of the most pristine natural area on the planet, and it's destroyed. And to this day, it's destroyed. And I was finishing up my architecture degree at this time, and I was living in New York City. And I remember, I have this vivid memory of riding the subway car to class, and hanging onto the strap in the train, and the woman sitting in front of me was reading the New York Times, and she was sobbing. Americans were furious about this. They were devastated, and so the popular culture, the average American, their attitudes towards the environment were really shifting at this time, because these were people who lived through the 1970s, the energy crisis and the oil crisis, and they were really fed up. So then we shift into the 1990s, and there's a lot of debate going on about, is global warming real or is it not real? And in the U.S., we burned up a lot of time arguing about this. Different big business thought one thing, environmentalists thought another thing. So a difficult time in our country. Fortunately, we've turned a corner now, and it seems like everyone is pretty much agreeing that this is the situation that we're in. So, what should students of design do now that it's acknowledged that we're using up too much fuel, that we're the ones who are warming the earth? How do we deal with this? And one of the things that I try to do with this lecture is that you've got to really understand why we got here and question everything. Don't take anything for granted. And here's where you start, by looking at the story and the reasons and the rationale for how we got to this place. So I got a few photographs of some of the latest ideas for building in the USA that we are working with. This is the wood framework for a super insulated house. So this is a house that will use almost no fossil fuel to keep it warm, and it's got walls that are this thick that are all insulation. Net zero house. Something as basic as daylighting, which we all learn about in school, it's really not used anywhere in the United States of America. When they build a building, they orient it any way they wish. They don't think about it, they electrify it, and it doesn't matter where the sun comes up, where the sun goes down. So I tell students to use what you've learned in this class and apply it to your studio project so that you can then use it in design. One of the difficulties, I would say, in the United States about building sustainably is that we have a highly legislated and regulated construction industry. So if you want to build an alternative building, essentially you're doing something, essentially that's against the law. I'm being a little bit dramatic, but you have to go and apply for a variance. There's a lot more paperwork that you have to go through, and that drives the cost up of your building. This is a photograph of a straw bale house. Have any students seen the straw bale? It's made with straw. So again, you have very thick walls. This is going to be a terrific looking house. The other problem that we have in America is that if you want to build an alternative house, your neighbors might fight it. Yeah, they want everything to look normal. This is a rammed earth house, which, do they have rammed earth in India? They do, great. It's catching on a lot in the southwest of our country. Not so practical on the East Coast with our climate. The difficulty in the United States with houses like this is that it takes a lot of manual labor to build a house like this. Manual labor is mind-bogglingly expensive in the United States. I think it's something that would be difficult for someone from India to understand how much it costs just to build a house like this. We don't have a lot of inexpensive manual labor, so it becomes difficult. One thing that is easy for us to do is do alternative mechanical systems. This is a ground heat system, so we use the constant temperature of the earth below the frost line to either heat or cool the interior space. This is pretty expensive to install, but once you get it installed, it saves a lot of energy in the building because it takes advantage of the thermal flywheel. This is something you could probably do in India too, I'm sure. Desiccant cooling systems. This is a big pizza pie shaped fan that is probably about 8 feet in diameter that has silicate inside of it. So you put it into the fan system and it pulls out the moisture in the air, it dehumidifies the air, making the temperature of the air drop down. And when the silicate gets filled with moisture, you just take it out and put it in the sun and it dries itself off. Gray water systems is a big issue in the USA. I think that one of the biggest convulsions that the United States of America is going to face is when we run out of water, because we're already running out of water. California is dry. The water in the state of West Virginia, which is about a 5-hour drive west of where I live, 5 hours west of Washington, D.C., it's a big mining community. It's up in the mountains, and their table water in almost the entire state has been completely polluted with chemicals left over from the mining, and they have no drinking water at all. And how do you sell your home? How do you move someplace else if you don't have water to drink? You can't even bathe in it because it's filled with chemicals. It's a big problem in America. It's also illegal to install a gray water system in your home. It's against the law. So it's changing. The new building codes are coming in, but it has to get legislated. So right now we're really in a period of extreme flux. People are starting to demand this though. Water bills are getting expensive. They see on the news, or they have friends who live in California or West Virginia, so they know what's coming down the pipe. The popular culture is shifting and demanding alternatives. Now, I'm going to close with one last point, which I always have to deliver to my students, because the situation with sustainability, and I was speaking to Professor Desai about this, is that it's not the answer. There's no silver bullet. So if you want to use solar panels to electrify the United States, it's great, but solar panels are made with heavy metals, and all those heavy metals don't come from America, they come from China, where they don't have any environmental regulations. So if Americans start using solar panels en masse, we're still the bad guys, because they haven't figured out the technology, how to make the photovoltaic cell without using heavy metals. It's a problem. Biofuels are a really good possibility for America, and they actually started using more biofuel a couple of years ago, except that the price of a loaf of bread doubled. It went from $2.50 to $5 because we're all maxed out in America. We don't have more land to plant more wheat fields. So they switched food crop over to fuel crop, and so there was less grain to make bread, so the price of bread doubled. And it's remained doubled in the United States. So there's always something that comes back to bite us. Solar water heaters, I love these. We see these all over India. We have them on the roof of our building and where I teach in Baltimore. Unfortunately, in America, it's gray and rainy a lot. So what do you do when it's gray and rainy? You can't use a solar water heater. This is very, if I was a fish, I'd be very scared. I saw this. This is a machine that collects tidal energy from the tidal water. It's just it's like Darth Vader of the ocean, scary stuff. Wind farms are a tough sell in the United States. Everybody loves them, but no one wants them next door to them. And if we had enough wind farms to provide the electricity for the United States in the year 2012, the entire state of Texas plus Louisiana would have to be a wind field farm in order to provide enough fuel for the entire country 3 or 4 years ago. It's just a lot of land that gets lost. I'm going to end on a high note, which is about hydrogen cell batteries. When I started teaching this topic about 15 years ago now, hydrogen cells were a real problem. They were trying to use these battery-powered cars, but to produce the hydrogen for the battery used so much fossil fuel that it negated the positive effects of the battery. But the scientists and the engineers have been working so hard for the past decade that they're actually figuring out how to make a hydrogen cell battery without using more fossil fuel than it's going to save. So this is an upbeat note to end on. This car cost $1 lakh US. It's not what I drive, it's not my car. It's a Tesla, very expensive. It's 100 lakh. Thank you. No, 1 lakh is, no, I'm saying 1 lakh US dollars. So it's 100,000 US dollars. Yeah. Not rupees. That would be great. So when I finish this lecture, my American students always ask me, well, what do we do? Frasier, you're such a bummer. I'm never taking one of your classes again. This is depressing. For Americans, there's 3 things that we can do as individuals immediately that will cut down on our production of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, and that is to travel less. So that means you have to relocate your home. So some Americans drive 2 hours one way to get to their jobs, single person in one car. And number 2 is to eat less meat, and specifically that means industrialized meat. This is a whole nother lecture, but the meat industry in the United States is highly industrialized, and Americans are really addicted to eating meat. And then number 3 is the third most important thing is to insulate your homes. So that's the construction industry. Thanks so much for listening. I hope people have questions. I hope we can talk some about it.
FAAA has certain sort of target by 2020.
2030. The 2030.
Speak a little bit more about their active role in the GBC.
Yeah, the USBC.
I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. The American Institute of Architects has a pact that any firm can sign on to in the United States, whereby by the year 2030, every building that they design will have zero net energy, and it's an honor system. It's kind of like it's going to be a contest, I think, almost, and they have this very formal agreement and they sign it, and so that means that everything that their firm does, from whenever they sign the document, they have until the year 2030, and then all their buildings will be net zero. So that's called the 2030 Challenge, and that's from the American Institute of Architects. And then the USGBC is the United States Green Building Council. This is a nonprofit organization that is the umbrella organization that runs the LEED certification program in our country. And LEED, I think you have LEED in India, yeah? LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. When LEED first started 15 years ago, I was very skeptical about LEED. Anybody in America could have been a LEED certified designer. My hairdresser could have taken the test and passed it.
and it wasn't realistically distributed. So for instance, if you lived in a very wet place like I do, like Baltimore, Maryland, where we have abundant water, and I put a gray water system in my building, and the LEED checklist, I'd get 1 bean. And if I was designing a building in Phoenix, Arizona, which is a desert, it's one of the driest parts of America, and I put a gray water system in the same design building, I'd also get 1 bean. So that was 15 years ago. But to the credit of the USGBC, they've been working every year, and they've revamped the LEED system. So now, if you put your gray water system in Phoenix, Arizona, you get 5 beans, and in Baltimore, you'll only get 1 bean. So they've made it regional, and it's really effective. There's also now different levels of becoming a LEED certified designer. So as a designer, you can take a test. If you're a student, you can be LEED certified now. They have a student level, they have an interior design level, they have a city and regional planning level, they have a contractor level, they have an architect level, and they have an interior designer level. So they have all these different options for becoming LEED certified. And then also the buildings get certified. And clients in the United States are now demanding LEED certified buildings. And state legislatures are legislating that no state money will go to the construction of a new school or a new library or a new public hospital unless it's a LEED certified building. So now the government is mandating it. It's forcing our hand. So people don't have a choice. It's expensive to get LEED certified. For a building to pass LEED certification tests can add $100,000 to the cost of a building. It's quite expensive. Did that help, Mahendra? Was that? Ani.
I mean, with all these, USGBC and LEED, Americans are they even close to like getting crucial lifestyle changes? Or even as a design industry, for instance, space standards in US are really elaborate. Like if you compare them to, India, or the spaces required per square feet, or the demands for individual spaces and not shared spaces. So like those kind of critical changes, these are all, unless that changes, how would you think are people moving more towards that as well?
I have a related question to this. So there's also the whole idea of consumption culture. And in the US, there's a sort of the American way of life that has been so well promoted over the years, and now people start to expect that, though I know that is also changing a little bit. Like the shopping malls that have been created over the years, and now some of them are defunct, and so people don't know what to do with them. Same with a whole lot of different types of buildings. So what's the architect's role in this actually? Because the architect doesn't decide that this building needs to be made, doesn't pay for it, is just one of the people who help it get built, which might get built even without the architect. So where do architects or professionals like us see themselves in this whole question, where there are larger issues of what people aspire for?
Those are good questions, and it make me nervous because now I'm standing here and I have to represent all my countrymen, and they're a complicated bunch. Well, one of the difficult things, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows this too, is that essentially everyone thinks they're a designer already anyway. Oh, I would have gone to architecture school, but I couldn't do the math. And you're thinking, what math? Right? Do they do that in India? Yeah. They do it in the United States. Oh, I so want to be an architect, and they don't really understand, all the rigor that goes into it, of course. So that's difficult. And also in the American culture, Americans are relatively transient, and that's because of our economy and where you have to move to go get a job. So people don't stay in one state or one region all their lives. They move around a lot, and a house is more a commodity now than a home. And I think that's in the mindset of Americans, that's really difficult, because when they buy a home, they're really, truly thinking about getting something that they can unload when they move again. And that's a problem. So we're trapped, Americans are trapped in this economic real estate structural system that we can't get out of. Now, going on with that is sort of the cultural attitudes about space and how Americans need a lot of space. And I sure feel that, because I need a lot of space. I actually live in a relatively small house, but I just need a lot of personal space. It's hard to be an American in India because everybody gets way too close to me. Because we have a periphery, and that's our culture. And that's, you can't criticize somebody's culture, and I'm not going to get defensive about it. Because if I do it to my culture, then I'm going to do it to your culture. So, however, why do they have to have 3-car garages? And why do they have to have a game room in the basement? And why do they have to have a front door that opens into a double height space that's impossible to thermally adjust? You can't keep that stupid space warm. And the big tacky chandelier, you guys are nodding because all those things are all over Georgia. You know what I'm talking about. And you can't keep that space cool in the summer, and you can't heat it enough. And so you got this freezing front hall that's sucking up all the heat in the winter time, and then it's sucking up all the cool from all the other rooms in the summertime when you're trying to AC it. Yeah, because they all want to look like they're millionaires. I think that has a lot to do with education. And unfortunately, in our country, it's hard to get federal and local governments to feed enough money into the schools so that they have the ability to educate people to think critically, which is kind of what I'm hoping my lecture is about. Like, you have to look at the story and think about, why am I behaving this way? Why am I doing this? And that's a hard place. It's not really human nature for anybody, right? The idea that this all might be finite, that we actually might be living in the era of the end. Right? It's done. I mean, the scientists have told us there's no going back now. And do you want to know something that'll really chill your blood? You know who's been talking about this for the past 15 to 20 years? The generals in the United States military. They say, the U.S. military says, the greatest threat to the United States of America is not external terrorism, it's not internal terrorism, it's not a nuclear threat, it's global climate warming. The American military has been saying that for over a decade. It makes your heart race. That's some serious stuff. Is anybody listening to that? Who wants to hear that? My God, no, I want to go to the mall. I want to go shopping. What a downer, right? And it's against human nature. If we really thought about that, we'd all stop. We wouldn't be able to function. We'd have nervous breakdowns and would stop, right? So it's hard. It's hard. And so what you can do is try to think critically and positively and be different the next day, if you can. I hope that answered it a bit. I'm not sure. Thanks. Andy.
Sure. I'm an American, so I feel free to attack your country. Although I live in Canada now, just to make that clear, but I still got a U.S. passport, too. Americans, when they have extra money, they put it in their house. And that's a problem. And their status is determined by the size of their house. I mean, the car is important. If you go to Japan, the people wear their status on their bodies. I mean, people are beautiful in Japan. With their clothing, you go in the subway, and everybody's dressed like a king and a queen. In America, you don't, you just wear jeans and a T-shirt, but you have a $3 million house. That's the way they think. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. Because, I mean, your thing about the game room and the cellar, I design houses, and that just drives me crazy. I design a house for somebody, and they say, well, I want a pool room in my cellar. And I say, can you play pool? They go, no. They don't care about pool, but it's the status. And they never go down there. So.
It's very true. It's very astute, Andy. Thank you. Yeah.
Astute, but it's everywhere in America. And Canada, too. I mean, it's in Canada. People have 2 people live in 13 rooms or something, and they go into a room and they don't recognize it because they haven't been there in like 3 years. So it's a problem.
Any other questions?
I have a question about whether America is importing less food or more food at present. Because when I was in the southern states, in places like Alabama, obviously they produced cotton, tobacco, all of those things. And those communities are just decimated. There's no work, there's no encouragement to actually farm. And the soil looks pretty fertile. I'm not an expert, but I just wondered, was there anything being done to actually encourage production within a closed loop cycle which would actually allow people to develop their own landscapes, to create food banks, that a more sustainable, resource efficient use, because there's not really a huge population in America. Mm-hmm. And if it is continuing to import huge amounts of food and fuel, there's maybe some questions. I mean, that is a lifestyle question, but it's a question about resource efficiency, which we see a lot of in India, actually. When I've been driving through the landscapes here, there's incredible efficiency in the way in which people are farming.
Yeah,
there's crops, and so I find that a really interesting contrast between the southern states, particularly in America and India.
Well, that's
It's an observation, really, rather than a.
We have a phenomenon in the United States that we call food deserts. And they happen in urban areas, and they particularly happen in impoverished minority neighborhoods where there'll be no grocery store. Or if there is a supermarket, they get the worst produce. The tomatoes that are, when you cut them open, they're white inside. They're not really ripened, and the bananas that are completely bruised. So we have this phenomenon of food deserts that has become an issue of civil rights. And so actually cities have been taken to court by minority representing organizations and saying, listen, you need to be proactive, and you need to get a grocery chain in here now, and they've been sued, and so they've had to take action. So there is a popular movement to fight that. Also, in the major metropolitan areas, with the exception of New York City, because New York City is completely built out, we have urban farms and we have co-ops. There's a huge movement in the city that I live in, Baltimore, where you can join a food co-op and get locally grown produce. It's not cheap, it's expensive, but they have it in Pittsburgh, they have it in Philadelphia, they probably have it in Atlanta, they've got it in Boston. In the rural South, it's some of the poorest places in the country, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. That's a whole different set. Agricultural is a huge industry in the United States. So to be a small farmer, you can't make a living off of it. You can't make a living where you can survive in the USA. It's expensive to live in the States, right? It's one of the reasons why we're one of the hardest working nations in the world, because we're just constantly going to keep up. So this idea that you could be a small rural farmer and actually have a go at it isn't really realistic. We have some people who are becoming artisanal farmers, so they'll have goats and they'll make these little pieces of cheese that cost $15 for a round, that they sell at a gourmet shop. So there's that sort of lifestyle, but something where an ordinary American could afford this stuff, it's not going to happen in the dynamic of our economic system. It's just not feasible. This is a depressing answer, sorry.
Yeah, more questions?
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Susan, for your wonderful talk. Well, in the end, not so wonderful maybe with the ideas, but I think a lot of food for thought for all of us. Midway through your talk, I got a little confused because in between, when we first met, I got to know that you're an architect and you have a degree in urban planning and you're an interior designer, and this was such a great lesson in history that I thought you were probably a history major. So fantastic sort of walk down the history of the American construction and American life. A lot of issues that we knew and read about as part of our educations came together quite nicely, and I thank you so much for sharing that, and next year hopefully we get to see another similar sort of, yes, very nice. I thank all of you for joining us here for the talk today. With that, thank you very much. We'll see you next time at the next FAAA Talk. Thank you.